The Nimble Holster, one of the newest additions to Tom Clancy's Division 2, is extremely interesting and powerful. Thankfully, it's also pretty simple and not bugged. But how does it stack up compared to other forms of repair and other exotics? And how can we integrate it into our builds most effectively? Let's explore these questions today in another interesting investigation.
Like, comment, and sub so you don't forget.
Hey agents, it's Dispatch. Welcome to the channel where we talk about the math, builds, lore, and game design of Tom Clancy's The Division 2. Let's get stuck into it. Let's talk about what we're going to talk about. First, we'll review what the Nimble Exotic Holster does. Then we'll discuss some of the other options from a gameplay perspective, including the Exodus gloves, Centurion Scabbard, weapon talents, chest talents, backpack talents, and gear talents. After that, we'll form some conclusions and see how good it really is. As we step through this, write down what exotics and talents you prefer and why. Are there any other parts of the analysis that I missed? I try to respond to pretty much every comment. The discussion is why I make these videos. So let me know down below, and of course, like, comment, and subscribe. The Nimble Holster repairs 5% of our armor for every meter we run in a cover-to-cover move. I'm just going to call cover-to-cover move CTCM for the rest of this video. I'll be saying it a lot. The repair is done continuously while the move is being executed, so we don't have to complete the cover-to-cover move to get the repair. This means even if you're not going to the right location, you can still get most of the repair and then cancel your CTCM to end up somewhere else. This is actually based on the distance we travel. If you get stuck on geometry and stop moving, so does the repair. If we get staggered by an explosion or a melee attack, that will stop our CTCM and therefore stop our repair. But that's not all. Nimble also repairs all the damage we take while CTCM over 10 seconds. And this also starts happening continuously immediately after taking the damage. It doesn't wait until the move is over or anything like that. Nimble allows you to be nearly invincible while CTCM, even on an all-red build. Not only is the repair ridiculous while doing the move, taking damage also builds up repair for after the move is over. The repair is not increased in value by repair skills or incoming repairs stats. We can't shoot while we CTCM, but we can reload and drop certain skills. We can keep chaining CTCM moves until we find a safe place to start fighting again. Let's talk about how the Nimble actually plays. If we're playing out of cover, it takes a second to get into cover and then another half second maybe to identify a suitable C2CM location, and then it takes time to run to that location. It might even take 2 trips to fully heal as much as we want to. That's wasted time that we could spend shooting at the enemy. Trying to find a CTCM location in the middle of a fight can be added mental load while we're trying to keep our eyes on potential flanks, explosions, exposed targets, and dealing damage. We can just hold down the CTCM button and look around, and it should find us the nearest location and begin the move, but still, it's all just that little extra time and mental load. However, as a counterpoint to that, while we're doing the CTCM, that gives us breathing room where we can be pretty confident we aren't going to go down and a couple of seconds to think about our next move. If we start getting pushed, overwhelmed, or cornered in our current location, we can easily move to another location and get some breathing room. We don't often get hit during the CTCM, but instead immediately afterwards right as we reach cover, especially if we're not able to get to the proper side of cover. Therefore, if we find that we're not running to the correct side of cover, we can cancel our CTCM before we reach cover and then execute a roll and immediately press the cover button to get stuck into cover on the correct side. A long 20-meter CTCM can be completed in about 3 to 4 seconds and will fully heal us up, which is about the time it takes to pop an armor kit. Armor kits aren't continuous, however. We have to complete the kit before we get the repair. And while we do it, we can't reload and we can't move, so we're sitting ducks, whether that be to explosions, drones, or flanks. So Nimble is much more flexible, but armor kits are just a standard part of our kit with no opportunity cost. Healing skills require us to mostly stay stationary, and shields, although powerful, are very slow and don't let us maneuver very easily, since the shield always has to be pointed at the enemy. We might also think that Nimble synergizes with Umbra, since Umbra also wants us to be in cover in order to repair. However, Umbra stacks aren't built or spent when doing a cover-to-cover move. So there isn't really any synergy, and there might even be some anti-synergy, since these two states, doing a CTCM versus being in cover, are mutually exclusive. With Umbra, we already have to waste some time getting into cover and then waiting for the heals and or for our offensive buffs to build back up. We don't then also want to have to do a CTCM. Nimble does synergize with the leadership backpack talent and its perfect version, the Captain. However, this talent requires you to complete the CTCM in order to get the bonus, so we'll just have to keep that in mind when we run this piece. Whether or not leadership is a good talent in and of itself is a discussion for another time. Nimble is definitely for players that like to play in cover. Adding another half-second delay to get into cover or get out of cover isn't ideal for players who are hiding behind a shield. Let's discuss the situations when Nimble shines and some other troubles we might run into. In Legendary, being in cover can be a death sentence, as we're not mobile enough to dodge the downpour of explosions dropping on our head. So while it's faster to transition to a CTCM, it's risky. If we move to a cover that's too exposed or just in a bad spot, we can get staggered and then hosed down. If we're out of cover, we can much more easily move backwards to avoid drones and move left to right to quickly avoid explosions. When we run Nimble, we are much freer to do CTCMs to avoid these explosions and drones, so being in cover is much safer than it normally is. However, also in missions, I noticed that there were a lot of places that I thought I could take cover or do a CTCM to, but couldn't. I usually play with the shield behind cover, but not stuck into cover, so this is just an inexperienced thing on my part, but one that we might all encounter. There are some missions where Nimble is very clutch, however. It seems like it was perfectly made for the Rat Queen fight in the Brooklyn DLC, or any fight where there isn't much high cover and enemies come from all directions. There are actually lots of missions in the Brooklyn DLC where this piece is very nice to have because there are turrets. These turrets have generators that we need to destroy in order for them to stop shooting us, and those generators can't be shot from where we enter the room. If we try to just run to the generators, we're going to take a ton of damage and probably go down. With Nimble, we can do a CTCM or two quite easily and get to a position to take out the generator. Now, is there another way to tackle these situations, like an oxidizer build or some other way to do this? I'm sure there is, but I haven't tried those methods, so I'm not going to vouch for them here. Nimble gives us the ability to tackle these challenges as a general pick regardless. This piece is extremely good as well for open world. In the open world, distances are much longer, it's open, enemies can come from multiple directions, and there's a preponderance of good cover. The open world isn't particularly difficult, however, so there's a question of whether we really need any sort of repair in this instance in the first place. The unlimited and high amount of repair also makes Nimble particularly good against hunters and rogue agents if you're having long, drawn-out fights. We can use it to reposition if pushed, or just heal or get an angle. I could see this being particularly good for summit level 100 against the hunters if you're not cheesing it. It's also very powerful for master missions where enemies come from lots of unexpected directions and there are objectives we need to complete but our options are limited. It's very hard to get to and or hold a hacking point even with the shield or repair skills. That unlimited repair really helps out. Summit also has objectives, and this can help in these situations as well. This piece really opened up a lot more options for me personally. It gives a lot of repair potential that is right there and easy to proc, not reliant on skills. This frees up our other skill slots for trying out new skills. I mean, we always had that option, granted. This just makes it that much easier to make that transition, especially for someone like me who uses shields and repair skills as huge crutches. I find that the times when I get in trouble are when I overextend and play sloppy or when I'm getting overwhelmed and cornered. Typically, the enemies start pressing me too hard, forcing me into cover as they maneuver on me and deal explosions or status effects, or just push me really hard. Nimble isn't going to help me in the first situation where I just play sloppy, but it can really help me in the second when I'm getting pushed. What helps us get out of being cornered is movement. What helps us gain control of angles is finding new ones. This allows us to CTCM out of that situation and reestablish ourselves. I also found it super useful in the DLC missions simply for the fact that I hadn't played them before. This allowed me to run around basically invincible and figure out how to tackle the new problems these missions provided that I'd never seen before. Using this piece can be a fun and engaging playstyle, but it isn't going to be for every player. So it's clearly got some uses, but how does Nimble stack up to other options? In this comparison, we'll only discuss talents that relate to damage with our weapon or repairs. First up, Exodus Gloves. I touted these as the new best-in-slot for most players. Was I right? Maybe, maybe not. Exodus triggers a smoke cloud around us on armor break and takes us out of combat for 3 seconds. Even if we attack, we still remain out of combat. While we are out of combat, the out of combat armor regen kicks in and can repair at least 40% of our armor. And weirdly enough, if we swap weapons during this time, for some reason it heals us fully. Great. These 3 seconds are a great time to reposition, secure a kill to remove a threat, or get some armor on kill. Obviously, this is incredibly strong. You're basically getting 3 seconds of near invulnerability and essentially the unbreakable talent just from one glove slot. I say near invulnerability because grenades that are already in flight can still hit us and absolutely down us. This can be a particularly bad problem in Legendary. Exodus has a 40-second cooldown, which is relatively short. The Unbreakable chest talent is 60 seconds. So Unbreakable, which has always kind of sucked for PvE, is now completely irrelevant. In most heroic missions, you can get at least 1 activation per room, if not more for longer fights. Exodus is not only super efficient, it's also very easy to use in theory. It triggers automatically and doesn't require any special synergies or management. That's one of the reasons some agents like Unbreakable in the first place. However, there are some problems. First, the function of the talent, even though it seems simple, runs counter to how some agents play. I think for most of us, when our armor breaks, it's a signal to us to hunker down for a bit and heal, or reposition, or just take a breath and decide what to do. Now, when I was running Turmoil and Glass Cannon last season, rest in peace to my Speedy Boy build, that build trained me to keep firing even when my armor broke because I knew I could secure a kill. Those 3 seconds of being out of combat are invaluable, but we need to be radically decisive to make use of them or they will go to waste. I found it extremely easy to have those 3 seconds flip by, and even though most of my armor is back, now I'm right back in the same spot I was before I lost my armor. I peek out to shoot and I lose my armor again anyway. The second problem with the Exodus is the smoke bomb. It can obscure our line of sight so we can't accurately shoot the enemy, but the enemy still can perfectly see us. Honestly, I just wish it didn't have a smoke bomb at all in PvE. As long as it persists, it's a huge downside. So Exodus gloves seem pretty easy to use, but actually take some skill and training with to get used to. It's got a high skill ceiling if we can master it. The Centurion Scabbard is an exotic that was extremely exciting, but the hype died out a bit when it was released. I don't know what it is in this game, but weapon swap builds just don't feel good. Maybe it's just me. On paper, it definitely has the stats to be a great piece, especially with the current striker meta. Faster rate of fire means faster stacking. This rate of fire bonus alone of 20% puts it on par with Obliterate at max stacks for DPS increase, since they're both a 20% multiplier. This is really the only way we compare these DPS-based exotics to repair-based and hybrid exotics. There isn't really a way to say 15% total weapon damage is equal to 5% armor regen, for example, but we can say that a repair-based chest talent might be roughly equivalent to a DPS-based chest talent. The problem with Centurion Scabbard is simply that it takes a bit to get used to and make sure we're getting the right buffs for the right weapons. Usually, we have a specific weapon for each slot to make sure we're using the right bonuses. For example, we might have a shotgun that we use in our secondary slot, since Scabbard provides a free reload when we get the extra mag size. In our first slot, we might have an SMG with unwavering, so we don't have to worry too much about that weapon being reloaded when we swap. If we trigger the bonuses wrong and swap these around, we're dumping the shotgun 20% faster and getting a long reload, while the unwavering SMG with a fast reload gets one for free anyway, negating the bonus. The same kind of trend the Nimble had also follows for Centurion Scabbard. There's always that tension and thought process running in the back of our mind, trying to make sure we're making the most of the talent. That's extra mental load that can distract us or diminish our confidence, and it isn't for every player. There's also another detriment to this exotic. Not all weapon talents work very well with Centurion Scabbard. Killer, for example, doesn't work very well because when you swap off the weapon with Killer, you lose the bonus. That destroys our uptime on certain talents. There are still some solid options, but not every one might be your favorite. So Centurion Scabbard is definitely a good piece. On to some other contenders. The Coyote's Mask. Excellent all-around pick, especially when we need some more crit on our build. It benefits the whole team. Of course, it's not great for when we already have several on our team. Usually we only want one or two to cover most of the bonuses. Okay, let's talk about the Big Daddy. The elephant in the room. The item most players consider the best in slot, at least for solo. The Momento backpack. Momento gives bonuses to pretty much everything, and I've talked about it at length in past videos. We'll talk about its benefits at max stacks. The damage of Momento isn't great, it's alright, but it's still beaten out by every damage-based backpack talent in the game. But it does give us some damage. Its repair is far more impressive. 3% armor regen, tons of shield health, and extra armor and shield tiers. If we're running a decoy, we get more skill tiers and more skill health. If we're running a damage skill, more damage. If we're running a healing skill, more healing and skill haste. We get the picture. Memento isn't something that we have to think about too much either. If we really want to min-max, we can try to pick up the trophies mid-fight, but we certainly don't need to. We can just pick them up at the end. While it is particularly powerful with shields and playing out of cover, it can still be played from in cover just as easily. The downfall of Memento is the loss of a backpack talent, and to a lesser extent, unreliability in group play. I say to a lesser extent because I just ran a legendary DUA while running Momento. I called for backup thinking it'd come about halfway through the mission, but it came relatively quickly. I found that I was still getting trophies to drop, so I just kept it on. I ended up filling up the buffs to max fairly quickly and maintaining them through the whole rest of the mission. So while I say it can be unreliable, that doesn't mean it's necessarily bad in this context. What's a much bigger deal is the loss of a backpack talent. Talents like Vigilance and the Negotiator's Dilemma backpack are incredible damage sources. To a lesser extent, even the Striker backpack is decent. Losing these sources of damage can be leaving a lot on the table, especially when we can get repairs from other sources and or just straight up not needing them. And here's revealed the tension that we have when making builds, especially solo. We need to be able to deal damage as well as keep ourselves alive. When in a team, we might be able to rely on teammates to heal us or crowd control the enemy, but solo, things can get dicey. While I think a lot of players would say that we don't need anything more than Gunner's 10% armor on kill, a lot of others might need more or might just not want to play that close to the bleeding edge. Of course, we could always run Hunter's Fury or Umbra if we want some repair. But if we enjoy or need the more general use of Strikers or Negotiator's Dilemma, where are we going to get our repair from? Well, we can use Bellstone or Palisades. Those might give us just enough to feel comfortable. If we want to use a weapon talent, Preservation is an option, but it's just a terrible trade while we could easily get at least 10% amp damage from another weapon talent, while Preservation's doing about as much as Palisades. What brand bonus is giving us 10% amp damage? The only other option as far as repairs goes is Future Perfect, which is a strong talent. This is probably the best alternative repair and can work for basically any build where you use your skills. Best for builds with shields, decoys, deflector drones, repair skills, and a little bit less good for most of the damage skills. That being said, if we have the option where we're running Sadist and have a source of bleed, Sadist is always going to be the best weapon talent. What's left for us to compare to is our backpack and chest piece talents. While some of these repair talents are quite good, again, it's hard to walk away from 20 or 25% multiplicative damage in most cases. The repair talents usually involve finicky requirements or short timers. Bloodsucker has crazy potential, but we can also run into trouble if the timer runs out on us. Adrenaline Rush requires being in close proximity to enemies. Clutch requires us to be exposed and firing to get the repair. We already discussed how Unbreakable just sucks. So what does this reveal? Well, we only have so many slots on our build. The most efficient use of those slots is usually for a damage gear set and a damage related weapon talent, which leaves the repair to basically one or two of our gear slots, the exotic or the brand bonus. Nimble and Exodus are great for these slots. They're versatile and give us enough repair that we can run any specialization. When we're running all red with damage talents all over, we're kind of stuck with Gunner or maybe Technician. Nimble and Exodus are easy to slot in without having to recalibrate or farm for special pieces to completely tilt our build towards repair. We just slot in these exotics and they give us a ton of repair. So we reviewed some of the top contenders. Which one is best? It's hard to say. We have to try them out for ourselves and see which one works best for each of us. I think it's hard to deny the power of Momento for solo. I know for me it was the piece that got me over the line for my first legendary clear of DUA. Check out the video in the card if you want to see that. Memento also can work in groups, and if we find ourselves not getting trophies, we can switch to another piece. Coyotes, of course, is bog standard and pretty good for group play. It doesn't require any thought and buffs the whole team, and it's still pretty powerful in solo. Exodus is flexible and powerful, but if we end up getting blinded or blinding our team, we should switch pieces. Nimble is a ton of repair if we enjoy playing in cover and don't mind things taking a bit longer. It gives us a lot of flexibility in terms of positioning and is very forgiving. I didn't go so much into the math on this one because really, the math is kind of secondary to how the pieces feel to us, how comfortable we are, and how we utilize them. Something like Ridgeway's Pride can give us 48% armor repair a second, but it's very, very hard to actually get that. Same thing goes with all these. If you don't like doing cover-to-cover moves, you're not going to use Nimble, no matter how powerful it is. Alright, agents, that's all I've got for this one. Hopefully you enjoyed the in-depth discussion and analysis as much as I did. Put your thoughts in the comments. All feedback is welcome. Thanks for watching, and until next time, this has been Dispatch. Take care out there.